I'm here at the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, and with me is the head of the archives, Raymond Frogner. Thanks so much for joining me today, Raymond.
My pleasure.
My first question is, what are the archives documents on residential schools used for, and how do they help survivors?
Well, the documents were actually collected by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission after the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement was struck between federal government and federal and provincial governments, different church organizations, as well as Indigenous representation, to understand the history and legacy of the residential school experience. So these records now exist for survivors, their families, communities, as well as researchers to consult, interrogate the nature of oppression, the way that the system of residential schools operated, the impact it had on communities, and how it actually has had an impact on the very nature of the identity of Canadian society.
It's been said that the Vatican has over 1,000 items of residential school documents, and the NCTR has been trying to retrieve them. What kind of information may be in those documents, and what does it say that they are still being held onto a year after the apology?
There is approximately, I would say, 1,000 photographs held at the Oblate Records Center, which is a Catholic order that has an archive in Rome. And those photographs still remain with the Oblate Order's archive in Rome. My recommendation was to scan them and actually return the originals to their home communities, because from what I could tell, the photos themselves were not really being used in the Oblate Order archives. Even if we got digital copies, it could be a first step towards communities going through those photos and recognizing the names of children in the photos, which at this point, none of the photos are described, so that could be a tremendous benefit. For the Vatican archives, I do think there is a large number of materials that missionaries, priests, other Catholic representatives have collected over time, from ceremonies, from gifts, from other occasions, and they've basically been returned to the Vatican for storage. I don't know how often they've ever been actually made put into public display. Those also could be returned to home communities, I think, if the church wanted to promote the concept of reconciliation with the communities that they had worked with in those schools.
And earlier this year, Manitoba agreed to provide greater access to the death certificates of children at residential schools. How is that going, and have they been provided? They
did, and the way the negotiations occurred, we provided the Manitoba Vital Stats with a list of names that we could identify of children from Manitoba residential schools. And they used that list to identify within their Vital Stats databases those documents they held that documented the lives of those children and the deaths of those children. We also put into that agreement that this is an ongoing annual review, so that as our research continues to go forward and we find more names of children that have passed away at schools in Manitoba, we will submit those to the Manitoba Vital Stats, and we fully expect to continue to receive more records from them.
And are there any other provinces who are cooperating with providing residential school documents, or any that refuse?
No one's ever refused, I would say. Some of the discussions have been very long and protracted. For example, Saskatchewan has never produced the records of Vital Stats with us, and neither has Quebec, but we've been in positive discussions with both of those jurisdictions.
And what more needs to be done by the Canadian government to ensure survivors have access to their historical documents of residential schools?
At the moment, we are working, quite recently, the federal government struck a committee called the Document Acquisition Committee, and the goal of that committee was to do another full and comprehensive review of the various ministries' records to find any records that document the history and legacy of residential schools. So this includes, Health, Indian Affairs, Library and Archives Canada, National Film Board, all of the federal government institutions that might have records of those schools. So to date, it's been estimated that there'll probably be about 23 million more records coming to us from the federal government based on that project. They're currently being digitized, collated and brought to CIRNAC, Crown Indigenous Relations, and from Crown Indigenous Relations they'll be sent to us. But that would be the biggest contribution that, in terms of purely records.
Well, we'll have to end it there, Raymond, but thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.